I found something in the store. A place. I found a place. It's like,
It's like describing a dog to someone who's never seen a dog, and then asking them to try it.
Backrooms is probably the single best case for atmosphere, ambience, and design over things like story, plot, and arguably to a degree even character that I've seen in years, probably since the manga Blam. This is especially the case in genres like horror, where the focus is often largely on producing those singular, intense emotions, which I find can often be just as effective in conveying themes and messages as elaborate story or world building. It's part of the reason why I'm so enamored with media like Signalis, Evangelion, and even to a lesser degree something like Tenet. Work that eschews perhaps more traditional or satisfying story structure in favour of that simple conveyance of theme through experience and emotion. Gonna be real, when I heard this film existed, my reaction was basically to roll my eyes so far back into my head they came out the other side. The whole Backrooms phenomenon, fandom thing, not the general liminal space appreciation, but specifically the stuff with all the flaws and monsters and shit, has had some interesting and appealing elements, but to me, just kinda felt like the SCP Foundation at home. I think the more technical you make something, the more you try and codify and define it in a web of terms and lore, the more it loses its mystique, its allure, its horror. So much of horror arises from a position of incomprehension, of not understanding what something is or why it feels so wrong, just that it does. And I think that a lot of that Backrooms content, with all due respect for the people who make it, doesn't really vibe with that. Which is why I was so surprised when I sat down to watch the Backrooms film, only to find a movie that not only seemed to know my concerns, but evolve and unfold in response to them. Backrooms is a film that, if I had to beat into a box, is about the topic of memory. How our memories linger in the corners of our mind and haunt us. How they cast long shadows over our present lives. How, even as we continue to remember and reference them, they, like all things, are subject to the inevitable decay of entropy. How continuing to rely on them, to live in them even long after this has happened, will in turn do the same to us, warp and distort us until we only vaguely resemble the original thing to begin with, and that can apply to concepts, ideas, people, and places. The film's two protagonists, Clark, the alcoholic, messily divorced manager of a failing furniture store, and Mary, a therapist who really needs some therapy herself to work through the mummy issues, are both in their own way trapped by their memories, living in the shadow of events that they can't quite recall as they were, the effects of this distortion filtering down into their actions and externalized in the form of the Backrooms. The Backrooms as a place are described almost like an echo of reality, one that resembles the source material, but gradually and inevitably drifts further and further until it just isn't there anymore. But what is quite interesting about them is how, despite this distortion, they also act as a clean mirror to both of the protagonists, revealing the depths of their characters by how they react and adapt to the place. Mary clings to her past because it is what she knows, but perhaps due to her training as a therapist, has the awareness to recognize that clinging to her traumatic childhood is ultimately doing her more harm than good. She holds on to her childhood, but it doesn't give her joy, it doesn't give her reassurance. In fact, the symbolism of her holding on to that piece of rock creates the image of something that actively weighs her down and keeps her stuck in place, and it's only by abandoning it abruptly and violently that she is able to survive. Clark is almost the exact opposite in that he is someone who actively seeks refuge in his memories. Resentful of his place in life and the loss of his dream of becoming a
fucking architect.
He falls back onto his memories as an excuse to blame everyone else for the ways things are, to shift responsibility for his problems and his flaws onto someone else, anything else, and even when he can't do that and has to accept the hurt he's caused, he just brushes it off with a That's just the way I'm wired. Also, he doesn't have to actually put in the effort of changing into a better person. It doesn't matter to him how twisted and distorted the Backrooms are, because Clark's own memories have already been mangled and butchered by himself, and in the end, it's his worst traits externalized that end up getting him killed. The Backrooms reflect how things were for Mary, and for Clark, they reflect how he wanted them to be. I think that Backrooms is a great film, easily one of my favourites this year. It's only the second film I've seen twice in theatres, the first being Sinners, and you know you've done a good job if I'm putting you in the same category as that film. However, I can't in good conscience call it a perfect film, partially because I think perfect in and of itself is a deceptively subjective thing that can't really exist, but also because I do genuinely have some noteworthy criticisms of the film that would be almost duplicitous to leave out, two in particular. Despite how much I've praised the film for leaning into atmosphere and ambience as vehicles for its themes as opposed to things like big plot events and lore references, the film does kind of try and have its cake and eat it too, with the whole Async Research Institute plotline, which ironically feels like it does more to drag and hinder the pace of the film than any scene of Clark just aimlessly stumbling around. It's like I said earlier, the more you try and define or codify something, the more it loses its mystery and allure, something that Backrooms at times comes dangerously close to losing. Now the film does, I think, turn it around literally at the last moment, with its shots of the Backrooms showing how the place has now copied the events of the film, ending on that phenomenal shot of a still life Mary. The film returns to a kind of unknowable eldritch horror and emphasizes that, for all of Async's research, they're still ultimately just kids grasping in the dark, trying to understand something they never will. It reminds me of the Federal Bureau of Control in Control, where the amount of detail in research only serves to reinforce just how little they actually know about the oldest house they've barricaded themselves in. But still, it is a substantial drag on the film. I would keep the cold open and the ending, but everything in between, the shot of the scientists watching the tape and every scene involving Phil watching Clark, just ditch it, make this scene his introduction, and nothing of value is lost. If anything, it would be an asset. The other criticism is related to Clark. There is something to be said about the rapid speed of his descent into madness. He's running scared from the monster one moment, and then suddenly the next time we see him, he's jumped headfirst into the deep end, having perfectly adapted to the Backrooms, and is living out his own demented fantasies with his own pirate roommate, and eating people, and maybe murdering his own employee and sticking her head in the fridge. Sure, we do get the suggestion that a significant amount of time has passed between Clark entering the Backrooms for the last time and Mary entering it for the first, but the impression the audience gets is that this just kind of happens way too fast to really have the impact I feel it needs. There's also the fact that Mary calls him out for not being responsible and not wanting to change and how hopeless he is, but I don't know, it kind of seemed like she broke through to him a little. Like he listened to Mary's criticisms and was fully intending to let her go, no strings attached, and I don't know, that doesn't really feel like the behavior of a man who is supposedly just wired to hurt people. But that's not really the main issue that I want to talk about today. And I say issue in quotations there because I don't think what I'm about to bring up necessarily needed to be one. I don't know if you noticed, but Clark is black. There is context to that coming, I just wanted to make you uncomfortable. Because I know me just saying that is going to set people off, I want to make things abundantly clear. Clark is a cunt. He has problems, yes, but they're not helped at all by his abject refusal to do anything about them. He isn't honest, he lies, he's extremely quick to anger, he willfully endangers people, he is financially abusive towards his ex-wife, and the behaviour of her still life implies that he may have been physically abusive. He stalks their house long after they're separated, and this is all before he starts eating mannequins and playing house with a caricature of himself. Clark is a fucked up piece of shit. And he is black. And that might sound like a small detail, which it is, which is where my problems lie. See, Clark isn't really a black character so much as he is just played by a black actor. The character as written may as well be raceless, but the thing is, raceless characters can't really exist, at least not in this context. The ability to write and conceive what you believe to be raceless characters is in and of itself a privilege, one that can only be enjoyed by someone who lives in a society with a perceived dominant group and belongs to said group. In such societies, that dominant group is then often viewed as the default. In most Western cultures, that default is whiteness, meaning that those adjacent to that whiteness have the luxury of essentially forgetting their race, and you can apply those same principles to things like gender as well. This crucially has the opposing effect that any minorities in this society are thus more aware of their own race than everyone else because they don't match that default. Ergo, when I watch Clark, I am, even if it is in the back of my mind, conscious of the fact that he is also black. And it would be one thing if he was a black character in some post-racial sci-fi utopia or fantasy where the concept of race is just fundamentally different to our own, but no, Clark lives in our world, the real world, with the only difference being that the fucking backrooms are a thing. Not only that, the film takes place in 1990 and Clark isn't a young man, he's probably in his early 40s at the youngest, so when Mary calls him out for blaming the world for all his problems, even though he absolutely does deserve the call out, there's a part of me that goes, I mean, this man probably grew up in the civil rights era. The world might have had a little bit of the blame. And I think the thing that does rub me the wrong way isn't even necessarily that Clark is black, it's that he's the only black character in the film. Unless you want to count Cap and Clark, and I don't know if I wanna. It lends more weight to his self-described feelings of isolation and alienation and gives Mary's comments an unintentionally charged tone that simply wouldn't be there if Clark was played by a white actor. I want to reiterate again, I think Clark is a shitty person, and I'm not saying that black characters in film or media can't be shitty people, and I'm not even saying that Clark specifically can't be both black and shitty. Beyond Chiwetel Ejiofor's fantastic performance and contribution to the Black British takeover, I think Clark being the sole black person in the film does genuinely add great nuance and depth to his character if you allow yourself to really sit with it. The issue is that the film just doesn't really seem to have realized that and has more so accidentally stumbled into this territory as opposed to deliberately setting out to do so. You could say I'm more frustrated than anything because this is probably one of the few parts of the film that I do think is underdeveloped and does stick out in an otherwise enjoyable piece of art. And I'm not saying that Clark's entire personality and character needed to revolve around his blackness. You can do a lot with seemingly very little. I mean, everything that I've just said about Clark and how his race further isolates him from the rest of the world, which fuels the separation he has with all the other characters, leaving him feeling abandoned, used and isolated, which then drives him to lash out at everyone else around him, even those that might have nothing personally to do with his misfortune, all the while neglecting his own personal agency in improving his own life. I think that's a really compelling reading reading of his character, and it is wholly based on the decisions of the filmmakers, unintentional or not, but because the film doesn't actually lampshade any of this, there's a part of me that still feels like I'm just trying to justify a thoughtless casting decision. And this isn't even me wanting everything spelled out in the film explicitly. I do love it when media encourages me to think and consider it outside of itself, but I think if you want me to give it credit for that, then it does need to at least give me those crumbs for thought itself. One of my favourite antagonists from all of fiction period is Zed from Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and you know I take any opportunity to rant about Xeno, but I want to be quick, so all I'll say is that Zed is an incredibly fascinating character, almost entirely down to a literal handful of very specific word choices in his dialogue that, to me at least, turn him from a simple stand-in for systemic evil to an enthralling deconstruction of himself and the reality of existing as a personalityless embodiment of a vague concept. The point I'm trying to make is that even if there's an aspect of your story that maybe feels unintentionally problematic or has consequences and readings you perhaps didn't intend, you can still take advantage of them by incorporating them into the story itself and taking ownership of them, thus controlling how the audience understands and engages with them. And I think this was a missed opportunity on the part of the filmmakers in this instance. Philosophy Noir has a more dedicated video about this topic, so if you're interested in hearing more about that, I will link it in the description below. Overall, Backrooms is an extremely fresh and compelling film, even with some of the weaknesses in its script that I have discussed. I think Kane Pixels has a great career ahead of him as a director, composer, and general artist, and I look forward to seeing what it is he does next, though I do hope that even if he does return to the greater Backrooms world that it seems like he does plan on doing, I still hope that he leaves this particular slice of that world alone. Part of what made this film so compelling was its refusal to be neat and digestible and easily explained, and while you could have a lot of sequels, no doubt adapting all of the insane lore he's no doubt built up over the course of his web show, I think that this film would perhaps be served best if it were left by itself to become its own kind of strange, distorted memory. If you're still in the mood for slightly mysterious horror stories, then I have good news for you. Kingscreek is a horror podcast produced, scored, and written by yours truly, alongside Thomas S. Dennis, aka TSD Talks, who is the director, head writer, and star, playing Damien Bachman, a graduate who moves into his uncle's old study and uncovers a bunch of weird, supernatural case files, unsure if these are just weird horror stories or signs of something stranger in the deceptively quiet town of Kingscreek. Season 1 of Kingscreek already aired last year, with Season 2 coming out this year. A lot of the music used in this video, if you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed is actually from Season 2, so if you want to hear these tracks in their proper context, then check the link in the description, or just go to Kingscreek on the YouTube channel, or whatever streaming service you prefer. Same thing if you want to listen to the Season 1 soundtrack. Speaking of music, I want to shout out my new EP, Practice, which came out recently. Check that out if you're more into rap. And of course, a big thank you to my patrons, in particular Michael Coolwood, El Pagante, Fox, Josh with parentheses, and Virgil. And to the rest of you, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye. Is my happy place. No, I don't wanna burn out. You know I'd rather fade. Tell my landlord rip the check up. I live my life on stage. My life is survival horror. Good thing I'm Leon K, giving grace to any other who cannot find their way. Oh!